previous episode, I talked about how John could stop people kind of like how Tim could. So Tim, when it came to stopping people, usually when he's moving with people, because he had reach, he would kind of cut you off out here, and he would use the equal pressure. And like I said before, in previous videos as it was, that he wasn't pushing you away. John could move against you and find those points on your body where he knew he could break your balance. And like I said, John didn't push people away, he broke balance. And that's because if he pushed you away, then he's got to fight. So when I'm working with people, one of the things I try to help them understand is sometimes, you're just doing whatever, and sometimes I can catch them on these weird angles and break their balance, and then they're looking at me like, how'd you do that? And usually I'll tell them about, ninja powers or something. But the truth of the matter is as I feel you moving, I can feel the direction you're going. I change the vector ever so slightly where I start breaking your balance, knowing you have to make an adjustment, and then I cut that off. Now, for people who, whenever they see these demos, because this is a demonstration, and nobody wins a demo. This is a demonstration so people can understand the concept. They say, oh, that's not possible. How could you do that in a real fight? But yet, you see cops do it all the time. I was just having this conversation with Frank. You see cops, they get a suspect who's on the ground, or the guy falls down, or they get him to where he's losing his balance. And you see the cop, they'll put his hand on the guy. And every time the guy's trying to get up, they can't get up because the cop keeps throwing his balance off because he could feel what he's trying to do. And so this is a trait that humans actually have. You look at football. How do offensive linemen turn defensive linemen? How do they get into their bodies? It's all about angles. They catch them on an angle, change the vector of their movement, and they just roll them up. Sometimes they catch them in here, and you literally see a million little adjustments, and the lineman can't get around them because he's got to get the guy's hands off his body, because every time he moves, he's just realigning himself to throw his equilibrium off because he can feel the direction he wants to go. So he's just changing these vectors. So people can do this. This is not rocket science. It's not magic. It's a very intuitive skill we have. If you're, if you got kids or nephews and stuff and you're play fighting with them, right? You're doing this to them all the time where they just can't get out of it. This is a very unique skill, but a common skill also that humans have. But it's a unique ability because you really don't have to teach it to people. They just have to accept that they've probably been doing stuff like this all their life. Nobody ever told them you could also do it in a real situation. So John would be here, somebody moves, and he would get into your body before you had a chance also sometimes to get your momentum going. A lot of times when John and Tim would stop things people were doing. So I'll talk about how John did it, because John was more merciful when he stopped you. Tim, not always the case. John would stop you. You're trying to lift your arms, and John would cut you off and do something like that. And they tell you, relax, I'm not gonna hurt you. And of course, people would act stupid. Now, Tim, say you were trying to lift your arm, and Tim would just torque that thing, and you felt like all of a sudden somebody like you got hooked on the arm, like somebody, like a monkey jumped on you or something like that. And the reason was, Tim just had a different philosophy of how to stop people. One of Tim's favorite things, and I showed this before in a video, where you're throwing a punch, and he would catch you right in here in the bicep. Sometimes he would even just punch you. Oh, it would stop your arm because you feel like not only your biceps are going to explode, but you feel like your shoulder's going to come out of the socket. But that was just his idiosyncrasy of how he dealt with things. And the point is, I guess I'm trying to make, either one is correct. Whatever you can make work for you, you want to make work for you. This is the reason why when I show people things, because people always ask me to this day, I noticed John did X, how did he really do it? And I would show them. It's like, well, like John would be in here flowing with a person's arm, and one of the things that he used to do that I always thought was cool. So one day I was working with John, and Tim came to class. This is when we were over in Nanuet. And John was working with Tim, and he was doing some stuff like that. He was talking to Tim. And what he was explaining, because he says, hey, Al, come over here, I want you to see something. And he was going like this, and he was touching Tim. And Tim was listening. And he's saying, so what I'm doing, because your arm's too long, is I'm playing off of all these little ridges in here. And as I feel the way your arm is moving, he says, I then take advantage of that, and then I cut you off, or, you know, I stop your arm. Sometimes he'll feel like the elbow will come in, like Tim said, you know, Tim lifts it, and John, instead of dealing with it here, John went right into Tim's body and pushed. But now obviously he was demonstrating. But then he went like this. He says, so watch this. He says, now, you know, just give me some pressure, Tim. So he was given equal pressure, right? Then you take your hands away. And then Tim took his hands away, and John's hands didn't move. And what John was showing, he says, yeah, sometimes, you know, when I feel a person push, I don't push back. I just stop them. Then I see how I change it. I'm like, yeah. He says, I just change it a little. He says, now if I want to grab it, I can just grab it. If they're moving with speed, I can just catch it because I still feel what they're doing. I'm just changing vectors. So he, you know, and he was basically showing me how he even uses the ridges, as he called it, not my term, John's term, the ridges on people's bodies. You know, your knuckle, your hands have these ridges. I can tell these are his knuckles. I can tell this is his wrist. I know this is his elbow. I know this is on the inside. I know this is the outside of the elbow. So John was showing me how he plays off this stuff. And Tim knew this stuff. But he was showing Tim some other things that he was doing of how he kind of deals with Tim and Tim's touch. Because the other side of it was Tim could be very light when he wanted to. Very light. And so when he worked with John, he was often, if you've seen a few videos of Tim working with John, Tim, you could tell, was being very light and very circumspect with his movement with John. And John was showing him how he plays off of these little things to help him recognize where Tim is relative to his body, to be able just to deal with him, because also Tim had incredible skill. And John never denied his incredible skill. It's, you know, kind of what helped John, you know, also kind of advance his own skill by working with somebody who, you know, could just basically slap your head off your body. So this idea, now, even from the smallest or lightest or littlest amount of information of being able to get into a person's body or even change the vector of their body or their movement was a crucial skill that John had developed. And Tim, of course, had too, and gave him an advantage. So this is why when you see videos of him doing things at speed, and he does something that visually looks like it's impossible. And then, of course, all the critics who watch the videos say it's bull crap, you know, it's sped up, you know, it's all, you know, bullshito, it's not real. And I always say, fine, put your arm in there and see how that works for you. And when you feel your arm almost coming out of socket, you'll understand that he's playing off of these subtle touches, feeling the structural alignment, feeling where your center is. And then he's just kind of redirecting you ever so slightly to be able to get you to move in a direction or to kind of lead and pace you to the place he wants you to go. So if he wants to take your head off, he can.